Welcome to This Explainer, where we're taking a fascinating look at the hidden mechanics of human achievement. We're going to break down why the standard advice you've probably heard a million times about reaching your goals might actually be working against you. And more importantly, we're focusing on why small steps drive success and what you can do to actually start making real progress. Okay, let's dive into this. Why do big, bold goals usually fail? I mean, think about those countless motivational videos telling you to go big or go home. They scream at you to take massive, drastic action to change your life. But honestly, if that advice is so bulletproof, why do so many of our grandest plans, the New Year's resolutions, the sudden crash diets, those incredibly ambitious business ideas, why do they fizzle out so fast? What's the missing piece here? Section 1. The Big Step Myth. Let's look at why drastic action usually fails. To dismantle this myth, we really have to look at the massive gap between typical motivational advice and our everyday reality. You know the advice: take a massive leap, drop out of school, quit your job to start a business, just overhaul your entire life overnight. And yeah, sure, that sounds incredibly glamorous in the moment. You feel this huge rush of adrenaline when you make a bold declaration like that. But what actually happens next? The reality hits. You realize exactly how much grueling work is involved. That initial thrill just evaporates and is instantly replaced by a crushing weight of fear, stress, and anxiety. You're suddenly staring at a mountain you just aren't prepared to climb, and it almost inevitably leads straight to burnout. Moving on to Section 2, the neuroscience of fear, the biology behind that burnout. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that to truly understand why this burnout happens, we have to look past sheer willpower and dive right into biology. And this is actually great news because it completely shifts the blame away from your personal character and puts it entirely on your brain's evolutionary wiring. Deep inside your brain is a little structure called the amygdala. Its main job is to detect threats and keep you alive by triggering a fight or flight response. Thousands of years ago, highly useful if you were, say, running from a tiger. But today, the amygdala actually can't tell the difference between a physical threat and the immense stress of a massive new goal. When you set a huge disruptive goal, your brain interprets that massive change as a literal threat to your survival. So there's a specific biological chain reaction that explains so much of our everyday behavior. First, your brain detects the stress from that big, bold goal. Second, the amygdala slams the panic button, activating fight or flight. Third, and this is absolutely crucial, your rational thinking actually shuts down. You literally lose access to the part of your brain that cares about long-term success. And finally, step 4, because you're panicked, you immediately seek the quickest route to safety and comfort. This is exactly why you end up endlessly scrolling on your phone or eating an entire pint of ice cream on the couch instead of working on your business. You aren't lazy, I promise. Your brain is just trying to protect itself from a perceived threat. So let's get into Section 3, the Kaizen philosophy, a truly successful alternative. If taking massive action just triggers failure, what's the alternative? Well, the roots of this counter-concept are just fascinating. Back in the late 1940s, right after World War II, an American named Edward Deming went to Japan to help rebuild their factories. He introduced a very specific philosophy of improvement. By the late 20th century, that exact philosophy had turned Japan and legendary brands like Lexus into undisputed global manufacturing superpowers. Fast forward to today, and a clinical psychologist at UCLA, Dr. Robert Maurer, realized that this very same factory floor philosophy could brilliantly transform human psychology and help his patients change their lives. The entire foundation of that massive industrial success really comes down to one simple question from Dr. Deming: what extremely small step can I take to improve the process or product? I really want you to focus on the phrase extremely small step here. They didn't aim to revolutionize the factory overnight. No way. They looked for tiny microscopic improvements they could make every single day. The Japanese actually loved this idea so much they gave it a name: Kaizen. It's the philosophy of continuous improvement through taking steps so small they seem almost embarrassing. When Dr. Moore applied this to his therapy patients, the results were shocking. For example, if a patient needed to exercise, he didn't tell them to go hit the gym for an hour. He told them to march in place for literally 1 minute in front of the TV during a commercial break. If they wanted to quit caffeine, he didn't say go cold turkey. He said take exactly 1 less sip of coffee per day. These steps were so incredibly small, his patients just couldn't even find an excuse not to do them. So the crucial point is this: you are trying to tippy-toe past the amygdala's fear alarm. Think about it. When the step is embarrassingly small, like marching for just 1 single minute, it requires almost zero effort. And because it requires zero effort, it causes zero stress. Because there's no stress, the amygdala stays completely asleep. You bypass the fight-or-flight response entirely, allowing you to take action and actually build new habits without any fear of failure holding you back. Which brings us to Section 4, Strategy 1, Small Questions. Now that we understand the science of why this works, let's explore how you can actually apply this framework to your own life today. See, we are constantly asking ourselves big, scary questions. Take this, for example. How can I read this entire book and improve my life? When you want to learn something new, you might pick up a dense, heavy book. But asking yourself how you're going to get through the whole thing, that immediately creates a huge sense of overwhelm. Your brain looks at it as a massive undertaking. And what happens? You just put the book right back on the shelf, telling yourself, oh, I'll read it when I have more time, which, let's be honest, usually means never. Instead of overwhelming your brain like that, you need to shrink the question. Try asking, what are some interesting chapter titles? Or maybe, what is one interesting story in this chapter? Or even just, what is the very next thing I can do? It turns out, the human mind actually loves solving small, playful puzzles. When you ask a tiny question, it sparks curiosity instead of anxiety. You open the book just to find one interesting title. Then you read just one paragraph to see what it's about. And before you know it, that curiosity has pulled you through the entire book. And this doesn't just work for daily habits, it works at the absolute highest levels of creativity too. Consider Michael Ondaatje, the award-winning author of The English Patient. He doesn't sit down at a blank page and ask a huge question like, how do I create a fascinating character readers will love? That would be completely paralyzing. Instead, he uses a Kaizen question. He visualizes a specific, tiny scene and asks, who is the man in the plane crash and why is he there? By answering those small, highly specific questions, he literally builds world-renowned masterpieces step by step without ever triggering writer's block. That leads us right into Section 5, Strategy 2, Small Rewards. We've talked about small questions, but equally important is how we celebrate our progress. We really shouldn't wait for massive milestones to do that. I want to share an incredible real-world story from Dr. Maurer's work to show you what I mean. Meet Jack. Jack was a businessman who was hospitalized with severe rheumatoid arthritis. The guy had over 20 swollen joints. His condition was so incredibly severe that his doctors strictly told him to avoid all exercise entirely. The mountain in front of Jack wasn't just steep. Medically speaking, it was supposed to be impossible to climb. But Jack was incredibly stubborn, and he intuitively understood Kaizen. And this brilliantly illustrates the power of micro-rewards. Step 1, all he required of himself was to just get out of bed. Step 2, the very moment he stood up, he gave himself a sincere compliment. Attaboy, Jack. That was his small reward right there. Step 3, he'd walk down to the local gym, not to work out, but just to have an enjoyable chat with the staff. Another small reward. Step 4, once he was there, he'd get on the treadmill for just 2 minutes and immediately reward himself with more internal praise. He didn't wait until he ran a mile to feel proud. He celebrated the 2 minutes. So why is the number 70 so significant here? Because by using this embarrassingly small routine of tiny steps and tiny rewards, Jack just kept progressing. By the time Dr. Maurer met Jack, Jack was in his 70s. And not only was he exercising, but he had actually won the Mr. World bodybuilding contest for his age division. No way, right? A man who was told never to exercise again became a champion bodybuilder simply by celebrating the tiny act of getting out of bed. And you can apply this exact same logic to anything, even something as grueling as running a marathon. If you only focus on the immense satisfaction of crossing that finish line 26 miles away, I guarantee the pain of mile 3 will completely crush your spirit. But if you implement a small reward strategy, like, say, allowing yourself to listen to exactly one of your favorite songs for every single mile you complete, you instantly break a massive, intimidating goal down into highly rewarding, bite-sized increments. You aren't running 26 miles anymore. You're just running to the end of the next great song. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to look right at you and leave you with this one defining question. What is the embarrassingly small step you will take today? Seriously, don't wait for massive motivation to strike. Don't trigger your amygdala with a gigantic life overhaul. Just pick a goal you actually care about, shrink the question, plan a tiny reward, and find a step so ridiculously small that it feels silly not to do it. Because as history and science show us, those tiny, continuous steps are exactly what build a legacy of success. Thanks so much for joining me, and I can't wait to explore more fascinating insights with you next time.